All right, so thank you, Laetitia, for being here and to make this presentation about bioethical issues for women in the 21st century. So I will present you quickly, but of course you can complete it with more information, and other people can also ask a question about that. So just to say that you are a lobbyist in ethics of NBEC technologies. You are also speaker at the European Parliament and the European Commission. You are also a co-author of the open letter on robotics and AI to the European Commission. You are a member of the European AI Alliance, and also, and this is something really relevant here, you are author of Women 2.0, Feminism and Transhumanism. And you are also a contributor to Politico, Le Figaro, Libre Belgique, and so on. So thank you for being here, and I will let you now start your presentation.
Yeah, with no due delay, I think we can do a quick zoom at the topic at hand. So what I'm really honored to be with you. I know you are a great group of people with the Youth European Biotech Network, and you must be. I'm proud, actually, because I'm much older than you are. I'm proud of what you do for our future, for an ethical, ecological future. And this is what we are going to cover now, where women can feel respected. And let's see how. First thing I wanted to do is to actually make sure that we have the growth figures of the market. What's the biotech market at the worldwide level? Because it's actually, money is always very, very relevant, and you'll see that the growth figures speak by themselves in terms of size and in terms of opportunity. So we're talking about a $500 billion market in 2020 with a projected growth rate of 10% towards 2027. And the European biotechnology just itself was valued at 112 billion in 2019. So healthcare, this is probably what you do as well. Healthcare expenditure and infrastructure are actually driving the market, and we've seen this with COVID, of course. Germany seems to be a very powerful platform for biotechs. I think I noted 600 companies, including startups, of course, but it's huge. The US biotech market is estimated at a growth rate of 9.2%. So there again, lots of money at stake. And so Germany, if I focus on it, it's $33 billion in 2020. And we can say that, and this is actually, those are the figures for Europe. So what that says is that that this R&D area in 3D cell culture technology, in bionomics, in genomics, and all sorts of sectors in biologics are really, metabolomics and proteomics are really key to making the world better and to actually making people wealthy. And when it's, you know, a power struggle, when there's lots of money at stake, and one needs to be really cautious and keep an eye on ethics. And Alexander knows a lot about this, especially in AI. So far, nothing new to you, and no specific ethical problems raised for women specifically. However, now let's see how we can zoom in a few fields involving biotechnologies that can raise concern. Namely, I would like to talk about procreation, and I'd like to talk about gender-based research, and I'd like to talk about the body market leading to a potential eugenics philosophy, and then the transhumanistic trend that we see unfolding before our eyes with the use of more and more technology in our lives. So let's start with the first, and I'm sure you can relate to that. Gender-based biotech research is biased. We know this for a fact. It's been the case for a long time now, and throughout history, clinical trials haven't included at first have included female cohorts, but things are changing. The Harvard Medical School has zoomed in this this topic and figured out that since '93, National Institutes of Health, the NIH, as well as other hospital universities, mandated that women and minorities be included in government-funded health research. So there's still a long way to go, but we know that without relevant cohort, we will fail to be accurate when it comes to cardiovascular diseases, for instance, which is the #1 killer in the US for women, 31%. Then 2/3 of 5.1 million are actually women in Alzheimer syndrome, twice as men, twice more than men. So, and of course, there's this huge sector of endocrinology hormones, which makes a huge difference. So this is something really obvious. It's been put forth during the COVID pandemic as well. We need to make sure that there is a 50-50, even 51% balance and ratio in clinical trials, trial cohorts. This is true as well with animals. The funny part of it is that we haven't been using female mice, for instance, until recently. So the bias starts from the very beginning at the research level until it unfolds in terms of developmental phase, where the clinical trial is just about to be completed. So I think we have a huge topic here, since science knows more about men and animals than about women. Hormones definitely is something I'd like to dig into, because there's a huge topic here, a huge area. And I'd like to say, if I'm being cynical here, is that women seems to be the weakest link somehow, and we don't want that. So you as researchers need to keep this in mind. So let's dig into endocrinology. Ethinylestradiol is actually a very relevant example. This is the most used hormone, synthetic hormone used in birth control pills, together with progestins. And what happened is that when I studied this with the topic of fertility with the European Commission, we've been exposed to very striking research from Eurotox, the Federation of European Toxicologists, and European Societies of Toxicology, because they classified EE2, ethinylestradiol, among the carcinogenic and cancerogenic molecules. So technically, it's an endocrine disruptor. It's a hazardous chemical product, and we use it in our women's body on a very large scale. So this seems to be a major issue, a major topic, and health and ecosystems damage caused by these disruptors and chemical products to human organisms, like animals, men or women, likely, must be analyzed in depth and to evaluate the outcomes of infertility and health in general, as well as on the environment. So there's an urgency here to take this into account and make sure. We've actually, some studies which have been contradictory with other studies, but just to give you a heads up on what the studies say is that some fish species have been feminized by this particular EE2 molecule. So some fish do react to feminine hormones in great quantities in used waters. So, that speaks by itself. We need to be creative. We need to be good, to find ways towards good research and this doesn't mean that this doesn't seem to be the case with the E2, which could be at some point a route for infertility. And we need to find a way to boost fertility at this point, because we have an issue of infertility, of major infertility around the world. When it comes to neurology, I'd say that I've heard many TEDx and studied a few works from neurologists around the world, including Daphne Joel in Israel, for instance, or Carissa Sabonmatz, who's a neurologist, happens to be a structural biologist who's a transgender, and he was asking whether, she was asking whether she was a woman and how she turned out to be a woman or not, you see. And so all those, there again, those differences, neurological and cerebral technologies need to be really thorough in understanding sex differences, to be able to adapt medication, to adapt cerebral implants, brain implants, to adapt gene therapies to men and women. What she says, actually, Carissa Sabonmatz, is that my colleague and I in genetics, neuroscience, physiology, and psychology, we're trying to figure out exactly how gender works. And I think this is all the more relevant. We're not there yet. So as I said, it might not be a clear-cut ethical issue here, but I'm just raising issues that are to be taken into account when it comes to research and development. We can't make do without it. Gender differences need to be taken into account at all costs, whether structural, whether neurological, whether hormonal, you've understood. Now let's dig into artificial reproductive technologies. And there again, as I said, when we talk about ethics, let's talk about market size, because it's really what it's down to when you find something, a slippery slope towards unethical practices. So the global artificial reproductive technology market, ART, is valued at $25 billion in 2019, with a growth rate of 12% in Asia Pacific and 9% in Europe. So as you can see, we're talking big money, 50%, $50 billion towards 2025, 2027, I apologize. And of course, the rising incidence of infertility is part of the impetus that we're seeing. Infertility is actually very wide, has a very wide array, possible array of investigation. The causal factors are very, very diverse, from ways of life, from there again hormones, from IVF practices, from age of conception, et cetera, et cetera. So infertility is definitely an area where women would gain greatly in being studied if we studied the ins and outs of fertility in greater length, instead of giving the immediate answer of technology, if you see what I'm saying, the trying to decipher and understand the mechanics of it and improve the mechanics instead of trying to find some fixes, some quick fixes. They're not easy fixes, because there's barely a 10% result rate with IVF, but yet this seems to be the answer, the automatic answer to infertility problems. Now we're talking about 6.7 million US American women, so who were unable to bear a child. So it's 11% of the reproductive population. It's major, and I don't have the European numbers here, but I think it's around 25% of couples who have at least one factor of infertility. Impaired in fecundity is actually something really serious in terms of not only medical research, but also in terms of demography and democracy, really. There's been the opening of a new portfolio within the European Commission, a commissioner to democracy and demography, and rightly so. I think she has a portfolio that is really relevant when trying to analyze and put together how the demographic imbalance and the infertility raising can actually affect the democratic systems around Europe. Coming back to my slide, I will say that genomics, just this market is valued to $11 billion towards 2028. So there again, huge potential, huge opportunities. And the surrogacy market I've estimated it to $5 billion in 2019. I say I because I've been compiling figures. Those figures are non-published. I was just adding and doing the math with various areas of the world where surrogacy is being practiced. ART, when you talk about ART, we can actually list a few techniques that are typically used and the research and development that comes with it, of course. Stimulation hormones, DNA sequencing, egg harvesting and freezing, storage fees, sperm collection, genome screening, embryo, etc. Termination of defective pregnancy, hysterectomy, fixing reproductive capacities, IVF medical instruments and devices, which is quite a solid and vast market as well. And then I added lawyers, lawns, and psychoanalysts in sort of a cynical way, because this is part of the artificial reproduction process, in that, surrogacy comes with special insurance, special contracts, special lawyers, special agencies. Some people have recourse to a loan to buy a child, and psychoanalysts, because of course going through IVF, for instance, comes at a cost, and it's usually mental health is impacted. What is it to say? Just to give you a heads up, a few figures here. Egg harvesting, for instance, when I talk about it ranges from fertility clinics to from $3,000 per cycle, $3,000 roughly per cycle, plus an annual fee of $250 per storage. So if you wanted to store your vials of either oocytes or embryos, that's going to be an additional $250. Collection of just oocytes is $1,000, but in Belgium, in India, I'm sorry, for sperm specimen, it can range from $50 to $2,000 per specimen. And then you have to add screening. Genome screening ranges around $8,000. IVF, I was mentioning earlier on, the IVF medical instruments and devices is around $800 million. It was actually $800 million in 2019. And then, of course, the huge pharmaceutical sector, which is seriously involved in this with hormonal treatments. And so the big pharma, as we've been hearing over and over in the COVID crisis, is highly involved. The legislation is actually quite lenient in many countries towards the non-legal framework given to fertility clinics. It's more difficult to put a pharmaceutical product on the market than to actually declare that I'm a fertility doctor. You don't need to take any degrees. You don't need to be any special diploma to carry an embryo from point A to point B around the globe. And there is a serious lack of legal framework in that area. There's a cultural push from private companies, and this is something that I come back, and that's why I really want to emphasize this. Private companies offering employee benefits for surrogacy and for oocyte collection, egg harvesting. For instance, Salesforce, which is a major, and Facebook, which are two major big tech companies, The sales was offered $10,000 when you have a recourse to surrogacy, and $20,000 for Facebook. And Amazon offers, I think, offers $6,000 reimbursement if you are to be preserving your eggs, meaning that they would keep you in your post for a long time, you know, pushing you to more efficiency and staying on the job. Good and bad, as you can see. So you've gotten my point already. I'm actually saying that procreation has become highly technicized. I'm questioning increasing infertility because it needs to be investigated. And somehow, if we were to come back to the normal old-fashioned way of making babies, maybe people would not turn out to be so infertile. So I'd like to see more into this, and I've actually challenged the EU funds to investigate and send more money and fuel more money into research in this area of infertility. There were globally more than 1.5, I guess this number is completely outdated, 1.5 million in vitro babies in Europe born since '78. Some of them have health issues, and women really take a toll from a health point of view on giving birth, and the children too. So that's something that needs to be investigated. But I figured out that the two studies from Australia and from China proved those defects in babies and on women, and the difficulties in babies, and those studies have been put aside. So you see, there again, the truth needs to prevail, and truth means, you know, being honest and making sure that women don't get into a slippery slope of being stuck and being mobbed into non-pregnant, how can I put this, non-procreative bodies. Andrology, for instance, in 2018 is an Australian research, and it points out significant differences in general physical health and metabolic and reproductive health, including lower sperm quality in young adult males born from IVF, especially ICSI babies, you know, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. They compared to spontaneously conceived children, they compare badly in terms of low sperm quality. The meta-analysis from the Chinese University of Zhejiang, published in 2013, also find out that there no difference in cognitive, motor, and language development, but lower IQ scores, lower motor capacities, and locomotor development and receptive language proficiency in the group of infants born by ART. This study actually specifically underlined the fact that an ICSI-born baby was at a higher risk for autism than in the general population. In terms of women specifically, with 3-4% birth in France by IVF conception, there again studies in terms of preterm preeclampsia, in terms of breast, ovarian tumor, breast cancer, endometrial cancer. Those information, various studies do contradict, but that says a lot, I think, in terms of the necessity for more research in this field. Now, procreation is externalized, and that's where we are starting to step into transhumanism. It is becoming externalized somehow. Babies, young preemies that suffer neonatal defects can be extracted, and we've saved extraordinary teeny babies, and there's been an extraordinary endeavor and quite a miracle for 24-week babies. But then the cultural and social need for artificial womb is rising. And I've seen this with the Eindhoven University of Technology. Eindhoven is just around the corner from me. It's in the Netherlands, but just 100 kilometers away from me. And there's professor of cardiovascular biomechanics and an industrial designer, as well as a perinatal department head chair, have joined forces to develop what they call the biobag. I didn't use the figure, but it's basically this illustration, but it's basically a balloon, a red balloon that you fill in your baby with. And with a cannula, they can be fed and oxygenated, and the placenta block flow is mimicked as if it was a normal maternal flow. And so the exchanges of oxygen and feeding and nutrients and oxygens are constant, of course, and the bags are sealed, completely sealed. So this is a highly technology-oriented research, of course. Following the Philadelphia initiative, where you might have seen, actually, there was this figure. Oh, I skipped it. I'm sorry. I must have changed the illustration. I had this baby lamb, which was born in 2017, in 2014 in Philadelphia in a biobag, and they survived. So lambs do survive, do develop at a later stage in a biobag. And so the Eindhoven University is interesting. This example is interesting because what they're trying to achieve here is really this yearning dream of humanity of being born outside of the mother's womb. And Henri Atlan is actually one of the great great fan, or how can you put it, great fan, the great, he's certainly not a whistleblower. He's actually promoting artificial uterus as a way of unslavering women from the pains and tears of pregnancy. And what he says and what he recognizes is that women and child, mother and child, do exchange a lot in terms of emotional and stem cell, in terms of embryonic, not embryonic, I mean stem cells, and emotional, I'm lost here, in terms of emotional, anyway, there are tons of exchanges taking place, I'm sorry, between mother and child. And this can be mimicked with, say, the movement of the UA, the artificial uterus, mimicking the movement of the mother, music that's being played, recording of the voice. But I really challenge how he can actually possibly say that. We've been, the study has, there again, research has shown that embryonic stem cells can be found 40 years later in the cord, in the skeleton of the mother. I'm losing my words. I apologize. I need enhancement at this point. Maybe it's the beer that Ismail was talking about earlier on that I need. Anyway, so stem cells exchanges do exist between mother and child during the pregnancy, and it leaves a very strong trace, a very strong marking in both women and child. So technology might be able to replace this at some point, but how can we possibly think that those children will be normal somehow? And how could this artificial uterus become a lifestyle choice? Would that be the end of women, the end of mothers? Really, I question this, and I'm honestly worried, and you figure that out. Reproductive exploitation, women's rights. I've chosen a figure, an illustration that is really striking we women are now considered as non-prostate owners. See, it is just, this sketch is actually showing the reality of it. We are utterly different from men, but yet people would like to think that men and women are just equivalent. And by non-discrimination, for the sake of non-discrimination, they would consider us as just not a prostate owner. But that limits that strongly limits the women's rights. I would say that it turns out to be somehow an exploitation of the women's body if you turn out to take surrogacy, for instance, and artificial uterus practices acceptable and ethical. If this becomes acceptable and ethical, then we enter into a new era where human trafficking is acceptable, where mothers are not able to conceive naturally, and that's where I use the word maternal mobbing. There was a report at the European Parliament 3 years ago, which was vastly adopted, because people know that within the business environment, it's hard to be a mother, it's hard to give birth, it's hard to be cared for when you are cared for by the company that you work with, when you are just about giving birth, or when you're taking care for your sick child. And so harassment against motherhood does exist. And then if we are to be replaced by machines and by robots to care for our children, then this is the end of it. We're just men as any others. And so prohibition of ecological birthing and non-genetically selected or modified babies seem to be quite adamant, quite important and major, an issue. So the consumption of female body parts, we've talked about oocytes, we've talked about uterus renting, womb renting with surrogacy, but then there are a wide array of body parts that made a sociologist, Quebecoise sociologist, Karine Lafontaine, talk about the body market and the women body market. And that's where I'd argue that women are more specifically attacked in their own dignity, in the respect of their own body, mind, and soul, in the fact that we are considering her resources as body parts, more so than men. If I take the artificial gamete manufacturing, you need a oocyte to start with, and that would consume many eggs. Typically, to achieve, to get a result of one child, you need 30, on average, 30 eggs from a woman. Given that a typical cycle of ovarian stimulation is around 6 to 10 at the max, you see 3 women or 1 woman going through 3 cycles would potentially give birth to a child. It's huge. It's huge. It means a lot of mental disarray because of hormones, of great quantities of hormones. It also means great length of pain, just this, a physical pain. And this egg market, if you take Denmark, for instance, you can be shipped. You can be shipped from Denmark, sperm and eggs from someone based on the catalog of someone you'd like to have blue eyes or black skin, or you name it, right? So we're stepping in a real market and a real eugenic approach here. Embryonic stem cells, we've talked about this. And then there are two other areas which are quite interesting, is the menstrual blood, and the umbilical cord blood that I didn't mention here, and the milk, the breasting milk. Those 3 areas are non-ethically challenging, in my views. It's great to be collecting stem cells in menstrual blood because it's rich in stem cells, and that's great for further use, for therapeutic objectives. It's great to share in milk for other babies, especially preemies, for instance, that need breasting milk to protect them from allergies, for instance. It's great to save and cryogen the umbilical cord stem cells for future use in case of, whatever disease, syndrome, or cancer, you name it. So those are very valid reasons to be preserved. Yet, I would argue that because it all comes from women and because it can be used widely, then how about we became, a body part, a manufacturing plant of parts for the rest of the world, especially the rich, that can purchase those stem cells. Gene therapy and enhancement, these are areas that have some very strong ethical impact. If you take 3-parent embryo, this is the case you've probably heard of that one. It's this woman from England who does not have a DNA, mitochondrial DNA in function. And so what they did is that they took out the nucleus from her oocyte, replaced her DNA into a functioning embryo cell with functioning mitochondrial DNA, and then inserted with ICSI the sperm of the dad. And so technically 10% of the DNA of this baby doesn't belong to the mother or the father. And the epigenetic impact of this is major. IPS, I mentioned embryonic stem cells versus IPS. You all know what IPS is, right? Right. So I'd say that I'd just like to highlight the fact that to me, it feels like embryonic stem cell use, which is vastly accepted and legally accepted around Europe, at least, is actually very questionable from an ethical point of view. For one, an embryo, to me, including gametes, are not cells like any others. They're very specific cells. They're supposed to be giving life, and that's a major problem in considering them as objects and tweaking them and twiddling them and playing with life with those cells. And for two, IPS stem cells are more costly for research, but more efficient. Actually, 24 programs of research have come to completion for genetic trials, as opposed to no embryonic stem cell programs, research program that have come to completion. None, absolutely zero. They've never ever been able to come to a conclusion, to a conclusive conclusion, of how we can deal with this or that syndrome in terms of genetic editing, in terms of genetic impact. So IPS from blood cells can be reprogrammed, and it's really efficient, and the therapeutic purposes are huge. Yamanaka, the professor that received the Nobel Prize actually for this discovery, this invention, I'd rather say, actually, it's not a discovery. He actually put the whole system and the whole technique into place. And Yamanaka comes from Japan, and unfortunately, all the research that's been done in Japan is non-applicable to Europe or to anywhere else because of DLA compatibility and their very specific epigenetic expression that are so specific to Japanese. So unfortunately, we have to stick to our research centers that do consume a vast quantity of embryonic stem cells instead of using IPS. So I really challenge this, and I would like to see more of IPS programs, research programs. China, in terms of cloning, CRISPR-Cas9, you know what that is, right? The scissors to actually do the cut and paste thing on DNA. And DNA is actually what I challenged CRISPR-Cas9 as ethical or non-ethical is when you use it on germline cells or not. That's fairly simple. And the Oviedo Convention, ratified in '94 by 150 countries around the world, was actually guaranteeing that no genome editing would be performed at a germline level. And this has been sampled because we know for a fact that China has been using this, has been trying very hard to modify and to give birth to genetically modified embryos. France is just allowed to grow embryos to 14 days and to create chimeras, as well as IVF gametes from embryonic stem cells, which is somehow a way of circumventing again the Oviedo Convention, which was forbidding to create embryos for research purposes. So there again, the massive use of unethical and disrespectful to the women body parts within this area. So we need to make sure this research field, which is huge, which can bring great good, remains very, very within a very strong and strict legal path, legal and ethical, I mean, of course. So in terms of transhumanism, and I'm checking on the time because maybe I've spoken too much. Yeah, can I spend an extra 10 minutes on this? Yep. Yeah, I guess we have, right. Okay, so the first, and this is, I'm not sure this is a name you'd be familiar with, Natasha Whittemore. She's the wife of Max Moore, who's the University H+, the transhumanist University H+ inventor. And so basically she's been bathed with transhumanism since the very inception of it. And basically, suffering less, aging less, and living longer, or even not die at all is what she's aiming at. And human enhancement is what she does. And even more than that, actually, she considers herself as designer of bodies. She herself is filled with prosthetics, as you can see on the picture. And she claims herself as a 3-person autonomous, and she's got various dimensions and layers of conscience. She wants to go beyond the vulnerability of her body and its limitation, especially those linked to wear and tear of life, of time. And she wants to be a physical, material body, as well as digitalized and virtual reality body. So all this together makes it a sort of a cyber feminism and cyborg, women's cyborg, where you can design yourself to the point of without age, replaceable genes, intelligence of 100 quadrillion synapse, constant update of AI. This is for Alexander. Interchangeable sex, turbo-loaded optimism with cognitive enhancement, robotics, prosthetics, et cetera, and artificial body parts. So what you see here is a full program, a full way of thinking. It's really a philosophy somehow based on technology, but it's really a way of approaching life and approaching the women's body that differs from what we've seen before. I said that women are model or males. Somehow what it says is the gendered social roles were criticized heavily throughout times, throughout our century, I mean, recently, very recently. But the pendulum has gone the extra way, where there are absolutely no rights to be a woman per se. So one needs to be confronted with the contradiction of, but if we're not differential, if you don't want to be, to make sure that there's a clear-cut difference between a man and a woman, because it's philosophically wrong and discriminatory, then what's left of women? And you see this a lot within, I work with lesbian feminists association who actually argue and call for the abolition of surrogacy, for instance, because they say it's completely irrespectful of the woman's body. So you see those contradictions are constant, and we'll see more and more of those happening as technology develops. Converging NBIC technologies, this is no news to you. Biotechs work hand in hand with AI, that work hand in hand with cognitive technologies, that work hand in hand with nanotechnologies and brain implants. So we'll talk from now on. I'll step back from biotechs only, and we'll include examples on the impact of NBICs on the women identity. So the woman's body, if you take the sperm bot, the picture at the top, it's a nanohelix surrounding the tail of the sperm when the sperm is actually suffering from motility issues, to make sure that it would enter properly and rapidly into the oocyte. Now, my question here is, what's left of this nanometal in the uterus, in the womb? For now, that means that it will remain in the uterus. Serious sanitary issues here. Bots, we're looking at future innovation on bots to identify DNA defects, and there again, selecting healthiest embryo when you have an IVF process with 3 embryos that have been implanted, for instance. Then a bot could actually say, well, this one is worth it, this one is not worth it. Let's get rid of it. But then how about the bot? It's extremely intrusive, it's extremely serious sanitary issues that need to be put under legal stress to make sure that we don't do, silly, hazardous innovation. Artificial womb does include robotics and AI. That is no news either. I would like to stress something that really strikes me in robotics. When I say robotics, of course, it uses nanotechnology as well as AI. But I've noticed that a vast majority of robots have female traits. And you'd agree with me that you'd trust a robot with female traits more easily than if it had this very masculine, very asserted, authoritative face. So, this is somehow, is femininity a must-have for empathy, peace, and obedience? Is this the message that roboticians are actually trying to convey? And is masculinity, on the contrary, the climax of violence and misplaced authority? This is very shocking somehow. Another example is Sophia. You know Sophia, you've seen her before. She's this Saudi citizen that was given rights, legal rights, when actually women in Saudi Arabia don't have rights. They can't drive, or just recently, actually, they acquired rights to drive their car and to play soccer. But beside this, they can't vote, they can't get out of their house without permission. And yet, Sophia, a robot, was given autonomy. And what she says is very critical, I think. I want to make the world a better place. So far, so good. I'm based in human values, wisdom, kindness, and compassion. I agree. If you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. Scary. Humans are highly programmable too. Okay. all right, there's a great deal of confusion here between a machine and a man. And I get scared, especially when it's a woman talking to me. I'm like, uh-oh, you're giving me crap here. Robo-carers, there again, there's a vast market opening here in terms of innovation on carers that could supplement, if not subcontract, women's work at home. And so I picked a few examples. I picked Buddy, the one at the bottom with this funny face, which is half an animal, half a human. And Buddy is actually purchased for $600, and it can play, teach, supervise your child with video cameras, so that you can actually leave your child in the house. It acts like a the old style webcam. And at some point, innovation actually, robotics is planning on launching robots that can supervise, cuddle, and even care, like you take thermal measurements of your child, telling you, well, listen, you need to come home, your child is sick. Also, we've seen a robot that was able to hold hand and cross the street with a little child. So, and then the question marks here are quite obvious. What's your perception of the child? What about empathy? What about how can a machine comprehend a child's need? Can you tell what's wrong and right for a child? How can a machine possibly give love? So there again, it's a field where ethics is critical, as well as legal, a legal framework, because we need to make sure that women are not becoming some sort of a, you had the hashtag Me Too and the male too kind of identity, because they need to be free to choose to care for their own children instead of going to work, for instance, or doing both, or quitting because this is just not the right thing to do because you have a sick child, or and finally, in terms of robots, this is my sweet spot. You see why I get really feminist and angry. Prostitution and porn. Guess what? It's always women, if not young boys, actually, because in Japan there's this pedophilia trend that allowed a company called Trottle to launch this 12-year-old, which is programmed to be raped by men. So sex robots, I'm introducing you to French brothel 2.0, $90 per hour to use this doll, the sex doll. It has, if I take avatar Frigid Farah, one of the avatars allow you to mimic a rape. So it's some of those robots have various personalities and various measurements or settings where you can go for, strong orgasm, free and with tons of pre-intercourse options. And so really, then True Companion launched in 2017 a robot that was pulled out of the market because it was illegal. It was actually programmed to resist advances of the owner and simulate a rape situation. So this robot was actually taken out of the market. But really, sex, masturbation, rape, all those options are possible, and it sort of perpetuates the women's objectification and the blurring distinctions between sex and love, really. And so this is all the more bugging. It's pornography, web pornography 2.0. It seems to to get a great market traction. What I say is that there's a campaign led by UK feminists against sexual robots, and I try to support her work because there's a great deal to be said in that realm. That's it for robots, but I think we know a lot, right? And then so I will let the steam off in drawing a few elements of conclusion of what I'd recommend when we talk about research and femininity. In a world of tech mediation, we need to make sure that we keep on, using human interactions. That the confusion between man and machine, and humanity and machine, is very very strict, very straightforward. You can't afford an old person in a Korean hospital being visited every day by a baby seal robot, telling her, he or she, that she's being loved, and this old lady falls in love with the baby seal, of course, and then she can caress it. And this is the only interaction she has with the real world. But is this real? We need to reaffirm this. It's not real. A world of monads, and I say that because all those techniques, procreative techniques, lead to the fragmentation of maternity, and fragmentation and the breakup of couples, really. And so that leads to a monadic type of lifestyle and a great feminine solitude. We already witnessed this actually at 70% of women, of divorces that are asked for by women. And we see actually tons more and more women who are not willing to have children because they want to stay alone and they don't want to be bothered. So I would, is technology bringing about more solitude, more loneliness, more sadness, in a nutshell? I see Valentina nodding, so I guess she gets my point. And crossbreeding and no frontiers between men and women and between humans and robots, that's fairly straightforward. We need to make sure that we do avoid this. And there's a good way to actually reinforce this is reinforce the sense of vulnerability. Being vulnerable doesn't mean to be weak, doesn't mean to be, it just for a woman, it means I am who I am. I don't want to subcontract my upbringing. I don't want to subcontract my children. I would like to accept aging. I need people to do some research to make sure that I go through menopause in the right way. And I want to be 100% efficient, but in my way, not in your way, not in business way, not in dollars way, not in stock market way. And I need to be able to choose my work-life balance. I don't want maternal mobbing. I want to be able to exert a real conscientious objection when it comes to work versus my personal life. And then how can we assert that men and women are equal when there's so much on the plate of women in terms of, as I said earlier on, harvesting body parts and the use of femininity as the best replication we can do with machines. And so I would like to conclude in saying that we need ecology in our lives and ecological motherhood. No synthetic hormones, just try and strive towards finding the right balance and what's right in Mother Nature to help women with hormones. No genetically modified embryos, because that means it's an absolute havoc on the longer term. Let's make sure that we build a true biotech research program with all the ethical framework in place that we've covered so far just today. And there you go. I'd like to thank you for your listening, and I'm ready for questions.
So thank you very much, Laetitia, for your presentation. It was really passionate to hear about that. So it's of course a really sensitive and important point to mention, and that's why we are here today, is to discuss of this situation. So we have 20 minutes for a question. So I will start with my privilege of presentation here. So I would like to ask you about a point that would be about the interdisciplinarity of your work, because what is really interesting here is that you really make together different disciplines. So AI, robotic, and of course the question of women. So that's something that I think is really essential to take it into account. So my question is, do you think, especially in the European institution, that this kind of questioning is taking enough into account?
That's a very interesting one. In AI, yes, no doubt. Non-discrimination in data sets, in decision-making, machine learning, all of this is being covered heavily in terms of finding the right balance, the right ethical balance. As for the rest, I'd say no, a strong no, on the contrary, because artificial reproductive technology is in some sort of a taboo, and that you don't want, even I'd say even, you know, I mentioned earlier on the Commissioner to Demography and Democracy. In demography, they don't want to talk about infertility. Demography to them is a sociological field of study, but it's not even an area that touches on health, touches on medical research. And it's a very valid question you're asking, Alexandre, because we need more of this. We need more of this. And the money that is flowing in startups via EU funds and via the Green Deal, for instance, Green Deal, we've challenged them to actually to make sure that we do find hormones that are respective of Earth and humans, and this has not been listened to at all. So what they do is, the European Commission, is that they do describe very well, they do find the right figures, and they do give you the right picture, but they make nothing out of it. So it's really up to us in this panel to do the job and get the money. And getting the money from the Commission is not an easy job, because it takes you so much energy, red tape, paperwork, to get, you know, a mere $20,000 here and maybe 100 there. So it's difficult to work them around in terms of scientific research.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I don't know if anyone has a question here, so you can ask it directly, or you can write it on the chat. So you can do what is more convenient for you.
I have more like comments rather than questions. I mean, that I was also writing in the chat meanwhile to sort of keep track of them. I mean, some of the things you said, first of all, thank you very much. It was really, really interesting.
Good. I'm thrilled.
I didn't know many things, and I didn't know them. I don't know if you understand.
Wow.
So yeah, there is still a lot to learn from all this. And I was wondering how much of research is really put, or like if there is interest into what's post IVF, right? I mean, you mentioned, for example, that by now it is known that like in vitro babies possibly have consequences in the course of their lives as compared to naturally born babies. And this, for example, I didn't know yet. And it is weird to know that, you know, they are still not putting a lot of effort in this field when if you look at numbers in terms of fertility clinics per se, and like how much it is in there, like how much business, of course, it represents as well. Like there is a lot going on in there, and not so much maybe in the post, no, in the follow-up, let's say.
So your question is about what's next? What can we do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Post IVF. Well, it's as I said, and this is why I started with the market. The market size is, I wanted to make sure that you had the eye-opening experience of, wow, my God, I do understand. There's so much money in it flowing into this. So stopping it is difficult, and even more so that we do have this extremely strong social and cultural and thrive to new technologies, and the consequences of the feminist movements have been, you know, we need to free ourselves from motherhood, and maternity is slavery, really. But then the answers that have been given are so far are, as I said, on the one hand, either harvesting the woman's body, and on the other hand, making sure that some women are less, you know, slaves to others. So no answer at this point. None of these options are valid. So the post-IVF options that I see is, I would try and trust the human body and let it do its job, and investigate more and more into infertility techniques. We found out with NAPRO technology, NAPRO technologies, that there's some very easy surgery that can be done to overcome issues of cystic uterus, or endometriosis, or blocked fallopian tube, or things like that. So there are tons of options where doctors, because they make money out of it, tell you, well, let's have an IVF procedure, instead of telling you, well, maybe we could do things more naturally. So I think one needs to really realize that there, because of the money, the market consequences, the IVF is used widely as an answer. But one, it's not that efficient, and two, and the results, and two, it's a painful, very painful process with brave consequences. So trusting the human body and making lots of research, if I may summarize what I'd like to convey as a message today.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There should be more effort and resources put there. It would be interesting actually to make a sort of market study, if we want to put it that way, or a fertility study, and see how fertility is actually declining in all these industrialized countries as compared to countries where there is no such a thing like fertility clinics and so on and so forth. And I'm sure actually we would see a trend there in terms of fertility decline, actually, where it is possible to go for IVF and this kind of things.
Yeah, Valentina, you know, last Friday, November 23rd, was Black Friday. And fertility clinics used it as Black Friday for babies.
Yeah.
You see how cynical that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And a completely like offside comment that I want to make here is that if
Yes.
IVF babies are indeed having like more troubles than naturally born babies, I mean, this would actually be more pointing towards, for example, adoption. I mean, I know that there are many couples who do not feel like they would like to adopt because of not knowing of possible diseases in the genetic, in the family. And this, I mean, this doesn't make sense if then they go for, I think, but this is a completely like different topic, I guess. I just wanted to.
It is not a different topic. People know the right of consent, consent is not, consent is not given in full respect of the law to that respect, because people don't know what they're going to go through and what the potential, and that's what I said, is just, this Chinese Australian market research that was done and published on PubMed was actually put aside. And it remains the best kept secret. There was also another one that I hadn't mentioned, actually, another consequence, which was quite interesting and made me laugh at first, but it's scary, is an allergy, severe allergy to rubber from babies, simply because they were born in a petri dish. You know, it's just, isn't that awkward?
Yeah. Like if they were already pre-exposed to
yeah.
It's really interesting.
And in terms of technology, you know, as technology goes, all those people who are willing to develop artificial uterus, starting with you know, an embryo going beyond the 14-day development, so beyond the petri dish, which is 2D almost. I mean, it's difficult to get the 3D effect of the embryo development. Those people are really, I mean, they see this as a Pandora's box, and they really see great potential in it. But some researchers, including this Chinese American Hunchi Li, I think, but I could give you the reference later on, said, you know, at some point she had to stop. She tried to go beyond 14 days in her labs, and she said, well, listen, I know I'm dealing with a human being. I'm stopping right there. And she never, ever did it again. And her interview is actually poignant. You can see the very strong emotion that she went through. From ideology to reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comments here. I don't know if anyone else has some questions.
If not, I have some questions also. Especially, you know, on China, because I know that, for example, in China, it's complicated because I assisted to a conference with the Chinese researchers, and they are, well, I would say, really careful about this kind of evolution. Because they are often presented with a lot of, I would say, liberal point of view of this transformation, but they are more careful in reality. But there is some of them that are an exception. So maybe some of them already start maybe some experience about cloning, for example. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if do you think that it would be a possibility that some of them will develop cloning, because right now I think it's a really well, forbidden, I would say, and you cannot do that all over the world. But do you think that it could change if there is more, I would say, less ethical standards, for example?
Well, there are a few questions in there.
Yes.
I would start with something that might look like a side comment, but it's not really. With the COVID vaccine, the Chinese were the only ones to develop vaccines on animal cells, tested and developed on animal cells, whereas the Western world has been using aborted fetus to provide aborted fetal cells to test and develop and produce their vaccines. Not all of them, but the 3 or 4 vaccines that were available in China were all animal tested, as opposed to 3 out of 4 American initiatives which were tested on aborted fetus. And aborted fetus are actually used in food as well as cosmetics. And there again, this is something that is not used, that is not said. What we see developing as well, and you'll see where I'm heading at, Alexandre, because it has a lot to do with cloning, is that we see some machines, and there's a French startup in the south doing this, is that they copycat stem cells. It's like a photocopying machine, you know, of stem cells at a very high pace to allow research to get very free, very low cost material. When it's iPS there again, or just simple, skin stem cell, I don't see this as a problem at all, of course. When it comes to embryonic stem cell, I see this as a field of moral concern, really. That being said, and because it actually relates to cloning, that's what they're thinking of doing, really. If you can clone not only humans but also animals, it would ease, the process of breeding. Generally speaking, breeding has become quite artificial in general in animals, but cloning would make it even more compelling and financially viable and sustainable. So cloning, as it stands, has actually been under very huge scrutiny and very huge legal framework. I would agree on this. Now, we know for a fact that there's been some initiatives, not unpublished, of course, that's why we can't prove it and we haven't gotten any results. And then the Chinese experience on embryonic, this modified embryo, the AIDS-free embryos, they were put to, implanted to a mother. That was 2 years ago. Were not clones, they were actual embryos. They were created with gene modifications. But cloning, we know, is taking place in labs. You've mentioned the Chinese as being prudent. I illustrated it with the vaccine, and I would also emphasize the fact that the greatest DNA the Google of DNA is in 2 universities of China. So there's a huge risk as well there, because they're actually sequencing so many people. They have more resources than we do, and they have free sampling at hand. So obviously the temptation is there, and we know for a fact that they've been doing it. They've been trying to clone. Cloning animals is proven to be feasible with Dolly, but with humans it's failed so far. We know that Russians have initiatives as well in that respect. They have a less strict ethical or different, let's put it this way, maybe it's just different. When robotics and AI is a field where when you discuss, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Alexandre, when you discuss with researchers around the world, they have very different background and very different anthropological sensitivity, and culturally, for instance, in Japan, dealing with a robot and considering a robot as almost human, and an entity that might have a soul, a certain level of souls among the 7 souls, is okay, but a brain implant is not okay, because it would perturb the flow. That would not allow, according to the Shintoist philosophy, that would not allow for the rest of your soul to be freed at some point. It actually interacts with the natural flow of the being. So this difference of perspective is also highly cultural. And when we talk about ethics, we need to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean the same for everybody. And that is extremely tricky when it comes to finding the right legal framework, especially for the use of AI, for instance. It's everything's so worldwide spread at this point in terms of technology that we might end up in a dead end or a very slippery slope. I hope not, and that's why I'm speaking tonight. This is my job and this is what I do at the European Commission, but yet, the stakes are huge. The stakes are big.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's true that it's also a multicultural question. You're saying that we need also to dialogue between a different country and with the researchers and so on, and to understand their point of view. so we could better communicate. Yes, it's absolutely essential. So thank you very much for your presentation, and also for the time that you take for the question. So it was really
my pleasure.
Passionate to do that.
That's the beauty of being so many, so few of us.
Of course.
We can have this very natural conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing it.
Yeah.
I wish you all the best in your research, all of you.
Thank you, and also good luck also with your work on the commission and
yeah,
and so on.